Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I am Abe with MysticGenMara.com, a small town mystic from the middle of Idaho. And tonight, things were going to be a little different. I did most of my notes in the old school fashion because of life happened. I wasn't able to sit at my computer as much as I would like to have to get this all set up because, day job and such things. So, bear with me if I have some hiccups in how everything goes tonight. But there's a person that, in some cases, has been completely forgotten in the mists of time. And this person, oddly enough, has contributed more to the modern-day practices of the average mystic, witch, Wiccan, occultist, and ceremonial magician than I think she ever realized her influence would be spread. Most people who are watching this type of show will have something in their house that was inspired, if not by her, than the actual work she did. Who am I talking about? I am talking about this young lady right here. This is Pamela Colman-Smith. Most people in her friend circle would call her Pixie. And the interesting part about her is you may never have known who she is. So, let's look at her interesting life, how she contributed to, like I said, a very broad range of the occult practices, if you wish to call them that. So, Pamela Colman-Smith, or how I will refer to her throughout is Pixie, was born February 1878 in a little town called, or section of London called Pimlico. And I may be saying that wrong, I apologize. And she passed away in September of 1951 in Cornwall, England. So, she was a British artist, illustrator, a writer. She owned and operated a publishing house for a short period of time. And of course, she wouldn't be here if she wasn't an occultist or a mystic of some form. The only reason I have even heard of this woman is because of she was the primary illustrator of the Rider-Waite Tarot deck. The original deck's title was the Smith-Waite deck or the Waite-Smith deck, but because of the publisher, that's how we end up with the term Rider-Waite, which is really sad because they left her completely out of the picture when they took over publishing this deck. But start at the beginning here. Overall, though, we'll just kind of, like I said, this is all the analog style, so it's a little discombobulated. Her life, she illustrated over 20 books, and there's some linked in the description below. She wrote 2 collections of Jamaican folklore, which I was trying to find somewhere online, but I couldn't find any reference to them as far as like being able to purchase them today. But if you know of anywhere where you still can get a hold of them, it'd be worth checking out because she wrote them, but also illustrated them. So it's kind of fascinating. You don't usually see someone who writes and illustrates their own work. It's becoming more popular, finally, but for her time period, that was kind of a rarity. She was also the editor of 2 separate magazines over the course of her life, which to me was pretty fascinating. She was born to Charles E. Smith and Corinne Coleman, and that was in February of 1878. Around the age of 10 or so, give or take, records are really weird about this time period. I dug around a fair amount and couldn't quite get as much detail as I would have liked. But around the age of 10 or so, she and her family moved to Jamaica because her father got significant job increase to move to Jamaica. And that was around 1889, again, give or take a year or two. And they lived in the capital city, Kingston, for a significant period of time. But part of her father's job was a lot of traveling. So that was home, but they traveled to New York and London and various other places for a fair amount of her young life. And what I thought was interesting is she traveled so much so young. And when we're talking this time period, travel was a lot less luxurious and quick than it is today. So that was pretty interesting, just the fact that you take your entire family, even if it was 3 people, on all these business trips. Around 1893, Pixie moved to Brooklyn, New York. She was around 15 years old and moved out of her parents' home and was like, peace, dude, I got some things to do. So she enrolled in the Pratt Institute to study art. Okay, well, now we're kind of getting into how she ended up where she was. While she was at the Pratt Institute, Pixie's mother had passed away in 1896 in Jamaica. So the weird thing was, from what I understand, she wasn't able to go home during this time because Pixie herself was dealing with some illness. Nothing specified, but it was enough that travel was not something that was an option, is the way it sounded. But shortly thereafter, she left the institute after being there for 6 or 7 years with no degree because of these health issues. But her art was enough to catch people's eye. She illustrated for William Butler Yeats and Bram Stoker, and I linked the illustrated book that she did for Bram Stoker, which was Lair of the White Worm. I actually did find that. It's still in print. They just started reprinting it, I should say. So it's linked below. I know that I will be getting a copy of it just because that was fascinating to me that she illustrated for Bram Stoker. And The Lair of the White Worm was Bram Stoker's last written work. So it's one of her first and his last. So it's kind of interesting crossover there. Pixie illustrated 2 of her own books, which are the 2 Jamaican ones. Again, I couldn't find reference for them. I'm still looking. If I can find it, I'll put it in the comments after the fact. Her father passed away, though, in 1899. So by the age of 21, she was completely parentless, which to me would be a little rough, especially at that young age. And it was around this time that she decided to return to London. Like, I lost my connection to Jamaica. I lost my connection to New York. Great Britain's home. So back across the pond she went. In 1901, she had enough financial means to open a studio for artists in London. And it was open a fair amount. There were quite a few big popular people for the time that had passed through there. And it was a place to do your art, to paint, to sculpt, to write. And it shows she just kind of wanted to encourage people in the path that she had chosen. And throughout her life, and I thought this was an interesting tidbit that was tossed in a couple of references, she fought for women's right to vote in Great Britain. She fought for women's suffrage as much as she could because she viewed the way things weren't working. Okay, I can get along with that pretty well, actually. So, shortly after she moved back to Britain, though, in 1903, she started her own magazine, which is called The Green Sheaf. It ran for 1 year. It published 13 issues. William Butler Yeats was one of the contributors, a whole list of other people. She primarily was trying to get more women's voices. Wasn't exclusive, that wasn't her goal, but she tried to encourage more women to write. And I was able to find the full collection of all 13 issues. It's linked in the description if you're interested. And after that, the magazine just didn't do as well as she had hoped. But in 1904, she took Green Sheaf and made it a publishing house. And she published for about 2 to 3 years, and mostly women authors. She tried to avoid men because women, in her mind, needed to have their own voices heard. And to me, it may have been a little bit along the lines of her voice in a lot of her life that I could see hadn't been heard as much as it should have been or could have been. Just my opinion there, but so I feel like she was really trying to encourage the underdog to step up, which during this time period, women had a lot of authority and a lot of position they could earn, but there were some ceilings, and one of which was the right to vote, and so she was really vocal about that in Great Britain. Pixie painted, and she loved to paint, and she painted a lot. During the years of 1907 to 1909, excuse me, sorry, she would paint visions that she would see while she was listening to various styles of music, which is interesting because there's a lot of people today that I know who will use music to trigger inspiration for their art. And a lot of her paintings ended up in the, and I tried to listen to this, so if I murder this word, I do apologize, the Stiglitz Georgia O'Keeffe Archive at Yale University. Because during this time, this Stiglitz gentleman actually was taking photographs of her paintings and displaying them in New York to pretty good reviews from what I could see. And there is a book of a lot of her painting that I found as well. It's been republished, but it's linked in the description. Her art style was very structured, very, I almost want to say bold, because there's a hint of a Renaissance, but enough New World art to make it very kind of folk, but she had her own style. Let's just go there. And everything that I was seeing as I was looking it up was absolutely fascinating. So if you're into art and just in general, she's worth looking into. It was during the 1901 era when she was illustrating for William Butler Yeats, where she was working with Bram Stoker. Where am I here? This is where Yeats brought her into the Golden Dawn, which this starts her occult life. So in 1901, she was introduced to and initiated into the original Samuel MacGregor Mather, Aleister Crowley, Israel Regardie, that branch of the Golden Dawn. That's where she started. Over time, which I will go into this further later, but I talked about it with MacGregor Mathers if you want to check that video out, the Golden Dawn fractured. There were some higher-ups that started wanting to take it one direction, others want to take it the other, and during this time was when she met Arthur? I didn't write it down. A.E. Waite, the gentleman who wrote the tarot, had her commissioned her for the tarot. But during the fracturing period, she followed Waite out of one branch of the Golden Dawn into another. And over the time, she kind of stayed friends with him from what I could find for as long as they both lived. So it was distant friendship over time, but it was still, there was a connection there. In 1909, during her period of listening to music and painting the visions she saw, Waite commissioned Pixie to create an artistic view of the tarot. The result is what we now have today as the Rider-Waite Tarot. And I have a holographic one here. So I finally found one. I haven't opened it yet. I'm kind of waiting to basically break it in for the right occasion. So it's been being conditioned right now. This deck originally was called the Waite-Smith deck. It was known as the Rider-Waite deck after a period because the publisher was William Rider and Son of London. And to me, they glossed over probably one of the most important people in the modern day occult movement because of what she did with the tarot. Okay. Her influence on the tarot remains today. Literally every deck that you have currently in the moment, whether it is Radley Valentine, whether it is Art Nouveau, they all harken back to what Pixie Pamela Colman-Smith did to the tarot. The reason I say that is her symbols are tied to almost every single deck we have today. Waite was working with her to make sure certain elements were within each image. And her deck, and I will reference it as hers because Waite did a lot, but she illustrated. She created the images that he fed her via words. She was the first artist to fully illustrate the entire minor arcana of tarot. The 22 major arcana were generally the only ones that had been artistically painted up or decorated, or however you want to say it. The rest of them had ace through 10, jack, queen, king, and there was one other one, I can't remember what it was, and the originals. But none of them were really illustrated. It literally had 1 cup, 2 cup, 3 cup, 4 cup, that was it. I have one of those decks, and it's based on the original concept of the tarot, and it is not the easiest thing to read. Once you get more into your intuition, it starts to become more clear, but just to sit down and open it up, it's like trying to read tarot with a poker deck. It's possible, not easy. But what she did was actually show you what the meanings of the cards were in art. That was the first time it had ever been done, and it's literally what inspired every one of the hundreds of thousands of decks out there today that are tarot based. The oracle cards are a little different, but actual tarot decks, they're all based on her original art, which makes her very important when we're talking this world. So, as is tends to be the case though, and this was a lot of them, and I mean a lot. I've read about, researched, practiced a pile of these people's different experiences, and they all have these really weird hiccups in their life. So, as with all the rest of them, almost all of the rest of them, her fame began to wane shortly after the deck was published. Without much income from her art, things weren't looking great in the financial world for Pixie. In 1911, she, oddly enough, joined the Roman Catholic Church. Why is kind of at a loss. I think it was more for some kind of community. From what I could find, she never married, and her romantic world was pretty much none. There might be something more buried out there somewhere, but I couldn't find it as of working on this project. So, she did come into a little bit of money shortly after World War I. An uncle left an inheritance to her. With the inheritance, she tried to operate a bed and breakfast. She leased a couple of properties just outside of Cornwall, which eventually was not that prosperous. She ended up losing those, and so she moved back into a small area of Cornwall called Brude, again still in Britain. She wrote and she painted her entire life, the rest of her life. But art is a finicky mistress, and anyone who has studied or looked at art over the years will see that when things shift, they shift pretty much immediately. Like one day you're in style, this is the big thing, and the next you're not. And she fell into the not category. And oddly enough, it was just after World War I. Her style of art reminded people of the old style, and they were looking for the new thing. Just because it's new doesn't always mean it's better. Just pointing that out. And they wanted things different. They wanted this new fancy, and she was a creature of habit. This is what she did. I'm sure she tried to work on some of the new stuff, but it just wasn't her. Her heart wasn't in it. It wasn't her art. And because of how she was working her art at the time with the writing and the illustrating, which wasn't much, she couldn't find a publisher. No one wanted to touch her because she wasn't the hot newness. Seriously? Such a joke. Unfortunately, this amazing woman passed away alone in Cornwall in 1951. Her possessions were unceremoniously sold off to pay debt. And this is the part that almost made me cry when I was reading this. It was heart-wrenching to me because, seriously, this is what you did to her. After everything was sold off, they buried her in an unmarked grave. No one knows where she's really buried to this day. There is some speculation that she is buried in St. Michael's Cemetery in Bude, but no one knows for sure. They just know that she died, they sold her stuff, and she was buried. End of story. Very sad story. Oddly enough, as artist stuff happens, in around 1975, various universities started to do displays and shows of her art, her paintings, and etc. That is why the book that's linked in the description and some of the other stuff that I have that's linked down there are actually available, is because these universities were looking at her art style because it became so popular after the fact. Unfortunately, not during her time, but after the fact it did. And I'm going to pull up this one last picture here because while I read this last little bit, I want you to look at this and just kind of get an idea for what I mean by importance of this particular woman. So, Pamela Pixie Colman-Smith. Her contributions to the tarot are valuable beyond measure. From those original 80 or so drawings and paintings that became the modern-day Rider-Waite-Smith deck of 78 pictured cards, she has inspired more than 1,000, because if you really wanted to look at tarot decks, there's probably close to, if not over 1,000 different decks in her lifetime, or after her life. Every mystic who reads the tarot cards today, every soothsayer who reads an oracle deck, can look back to this woman and these cards as the foundation of what we have today for the tarot. Waite inspired with words and the description of what the card meant. Those words would have not made it to your ears or made it in the way that they have and the impact that it has made without the work of this young woman. She worked tirelessly at her art and her craft, which a lot of them have done, but she's one that most people have forgotten, even though her influence is probably one of, if not the biggest, in modern occultism. Like I said, it was one of the more interesting people I've researched so far. And that's not saying that people, big names, Crowley and all the rest of them, they made contributions on a grand scale. People know their name. People know who they are. This young woman literally was one of the most important people, especially to the mystic side of things with the tarot specifically. And most people who read tarot decks know it as the Rider-Waite Tarot or one of the other assorted varieties of tarot decks, including the ones that are, the Dragon Tarot, or the Angel, or the Fairy, or whatever other version you have. They all owe how the card is interpreted, the roots of the current art forms, to one person. She was the first to do the decks that we know today, in the styles, I should say, that we know today. That is so fascinating. And just to me, I don't know, like I said, I kind of got a little obsessive about going through it like no one had done this before. It was pretty impressive to me, but that's me. So, if you're interested, there's a lot of information, a lot of art that was hers in the description below. Please check it out. It's on Amazon, most of it, I think. If there's something that inspires you, great. If you ever know of the publishing house that's still publishing her Jamaican folklore, please leave it in the comments below, because I would love to be able to see some of that. Like I said, just from the art that I was seeing that she had done while I was researching this, and I didn't include it because I'm pretty sure most of the museums have it as copyright, so I didn't want to go that route. But she had a very unique style, and it was really interesting. But I'm kind of without words, to be honest with you, on the fact that she went through and painted all 80 of the original pictures. They picked 78 of them, so 2 of them were just kind of lost to the ether. And from what I could find, she did that in the course of approximately 6 months. I don't know a lot of people today who could pump out 80 pictures for anything with quality and meaning behind them as quickly as that. I mean, that's a lot of work. Most artists will create 1 to 3 pieces of art every 6 months, and in that same time period, she did 80. And I'm not saying it can't be done. Don't come at me. But that's a lot of work to put, especially adding the metaphysical and the mystical meanings into stuff. I mean, just the Magician alone, when you really look at what's in that card, the original card, let me pull it up here for you. The second card over with the figure 8 over his head, there's so much detail in that picture, as far as the cup, the athame, the wand, the pentacle, holding the wand up, the different flowers, the robe, the belts. All of those things have meaning in the tarot, and she made sure to put all of that information into that one card. It's art, but it's art with so much more meaning behind it, and that's, like I said, the part to me that made such an impact. Well, I'll stop rambling about how cool the art is, but I am fascinated by it. It's amazing, and the fact that most people don't know who she is saddens me. The fact that she's buried in an unmarked grave somewhere around Cornwall is heartbreaking. She was a talented woman. She fought the good fight, and history is forgetting her. So hopefully this brings her a little bit back into the awareness. Like I said, next time you read your tarot cards, think back to the woman who first illustrated all of the minor arcana and why we have the images we have today. Please like the video if you enjoyed this type of content. If you wouldn't mind subscribing, that'd be awesome. And like I said, comment away, let me know what you think. Did you know who she was before this video? And does it make you want to take a little bit more of a closer look at your tarot deck the next time you pull it out? With that, I will let you guys go. Have an awesome rest of your evening, and I will talk to you later.